This football team vanished on their way to an interstate match in 1980. 27 years later, the team captain returned with the news that would expose the mystery behind their shocking disappearance. Before the tragedy that would scar a nation and rewrite the destiny of an entire generation, the Invincibles football team lived in a golden era. They were more than a squad. They were a symbol of hope. Every match felt like a celebration, stadiums vibrating under the thunderous echoes of fans chanting their names. The press called them the Invincibles. Children cut their hair to match their favorite players. Even old men argued in barbershops about which year's lineup was better, but everyone agreed on one thing: this team was special. At the center of it all stood Captain Adrian Cole, calm, disciplined, unshakably loyal to his team. He wasn't just a player. He was the heart of the squad. He memorized every teammate's strengths, weaknesses, even their off-field struggles. On the pitch, his voice carried like a drumbeat, pulling the team together whenever pressure threatened to split them. Off the pitch, he protected them like siblings. Under his leadership, they had become a brotherhood. Their coach, Victor Henshaw, was a man of principles, or so it seemed. For years, he had molded the boys into world-class athletes, pushing them through exhaustion, discipline, and unity. But on a quiet Thursday evening, something shifted. He received a call from an unknown international number, and the conversation lasted barely 3 minutes. When he ended the call, his hands were trembling. Something in his eyes had changed, flickering fear mixed with temptation. The next day, he gathered the team in the locker room. The atmosphere was thick, expectant. The coach didn't pace like he usually did. Instead, he stood frozen, swallowing hard before speaking. "I've been approached," he said, voice unsteady. "There's an offer. A life-changing one. They want us to lose the upcoming interstate finals." The players blinked, confused. "How much?" someone finally asked. The coach exhaled as though ashamed to speak it. $5 million. Split among us. No consequences, they said. Just lose. Silence fell like a cold shadow. Every player turned to Captain Adrian. His eyes darkened, not with fear, but with disappointment. Not in the team. In the coach. "This team was built on sweat and pride," Adrian said, stepping forward. "We don't betray our team for money. Not today. Not ever." One by one, the players nodded. Some angrily, some firmly, but all decisively. "No deal. We're not criminals. We play to win." The coach looked desperate. "Think about your families, your futures." "We are thinking about them," Adrian replied. "And that's why we're walking away." The team rose from the benches, pushing past the stunned coach, leaving him alone in the dimly lit room. They walked out shoulder to shoulder, united behind their captain, unaware that this single act of integrity would set in motion the darkest chapter in their nation's sporting history. A chapter woven with betrayal, disappearance, and a truth too haunting to imagine. The day before the team was scheduled to travel for the interstate finals, something unexpected broke the rhythm of their preparations. Coach Victor Henshaw, usually energetic, loud, and impossible to keep still, suddenly clutched his chest during a routine strategy session. He staggered backward, gasping dramatically as players scrambled toward him. "Coach! Coach, what's wrong?" Adrian shouted, reaching to support him. Victor collapsed onto the bench, wheezing as though every breath was a battle. His face twisted in pain, sweat rolling down his temples. A staff member rushed to call an ambulance, and within minutes, paramedics carried him out on a stretcher. The players watched, stunned and concerned, as the doors shut behind him and the sirens faded into the distance. Hours later, they received an update. Coach Henshaw had been admitted to a private hospital for further observation. He wouldn't be able to travel with them. The team was shaken, but reassured when they learned the assistant coach, Mr. Baxter, would take over their travel and match responsibilities. Baxter was calm, methodical, and loyal. No one suspected that the coach's sudden illness was anything more than coincidence. No one connected it to the mysterious offer he had received just days earlier. By morning, the bus was loaded. The players moved with a quiet determination, unaware that a dangerous web had already been spun around them. Samson, the youngest player, glanced at Adrian as they stepped onto the bus. "You think Coach will be okay?" he asked. Adrian nodded, though something in his gut felt off. "Yeah, he'll be fine. We just focus on the tournament." The assistant coach boarded last, clipboard in hand, forcing a smile. "Let's move, boys. Long trip ahead." The engine roared to life, and the bus rolled out. They expected a lively journey filled with jokes, banter, and music, the way every road trip had always been. But today, the atmosphere felt strangely muted. The road stretched long and empty, the countryside unusually quiet. Even the sky looked dimmer, as though clouds were gathering deliberately. Through the windows, the players watched endless rows of trees blur past. Something didn't feel right. As the bus continued deeper into rural stretches, they passed an unfamiliar route, one the coach had suggested they pass, suggesting it was a shorter path to avoid traffic. Adrian frowned but said nothing. Miles later, the road narrowed, leading them into an area lined with thick, towering trees that swallowed sunlight. The driver slowed slightly, his eyes darting left and right. "Anyone familiar with this route before?" one of the players asked. No one had. A few minutes later, the bus curved around a bend and came upon a checkpoint, a set of metal barricades blocking the road. Some armed men stepped forward, motioning for the bus to halt. At first glance, they looked like officers. They wore uniforms. They carried rifles. But something was terribly wrong. Their uniforms had no badges, no name tags, no insignias. Just dark fabric and cold expressions. The players stiffened. Adrian rose from his seat slightly, peering toward the windshield. A heaviness settled in the air as the bus slowed to a complete stop. One of the men approached, tapping the glass with the barrel of his gun. The assistant coach cleared his throat, trying to understand what's happening. "Maybe just routine checks," he mumbled, though his voice cracked. The doors hissed open. And in that moment, as the armed men boarded the bus with silent efficiency, the players realized something chilling. These were not officers. This was not a routine checkpoint. And their coach's sudden illness was no coincidence. The trap had already been set, and they were heading straight into it. The bus door slid open, and in an instant, chaos exploded into the quiet morning. A swarm of heavily armed men, faces covered, movements sharp and rehearsed, stormed onto the bus with terrifying precision. They weren't loud, but their presence was suffocating. No shouts, no warnings, just cold efficiency. Their rifles gleamed under the dim light filtering through the trees. "Hands up!" one of them barked, though the order felt unnecessary. The players were already frozen in shock, some too scared to breathe. Within seconds, the paramilitary unit fanned out through the aisle, yanking players from their seats. Adrian, the captain, tried to stand and shield his teammates, but a rifle butt slammed into his stomach, forcing him to his knees. Around him, his brothers in arms were pulled, shoved, and pinned to the floor. One by one, zip ties cinched tightly around their wrists. Rough cloths were wrapped over their eyes, plunging them into darkness. Someone cried out in pain. Another player whispered, "What's happening? Who are these people?" But no one answered. Boots thundered against the metal floor as the soldiers dragged the blindfolded players off the bus and onto the dirt road. The air smelled of dust and diesel. Trucks rumbled nearby. Large, military-grade vehicles. The players were shoved into their metal bellies like cargo, their bodies pressed against cold steel. Adrian's senses sharpened. He could hear the soldiers talking in low tones, their accents sharp, foreign. He listened harder. "Move the rest. Load them quickly." Do it clean. No traces. Get the bus ready. Get the bus ready? Before he could process the meaning, a soldier gripped his shoulder, leaning close enough for Adrian to feel his breath through the cloth. Your coach, the soldier whispered, voice chillingly calm, signed your fate. The words stabbed harder than any weapon. Adrian jerked his head, trying to demand answers, but the soldier only laughed softly and stepped away. Moments later, through the ringing in his ears, Adrian heard the bus engine roar. A familiar sound turned sinister. Metal scraped against rock. Men grunted as they pushed. Tires spun. The weight shifted. Then a distant crash. A long, echoing plunge. And finally, the violent hiss of water swallowing metal whole. They had pushed the bus off a cliff into the sea. Erased. That was the plan all along. The noise faded, and the players sat in suffocating silence inside the trucks. The realization hit them like a blow. To the world, it would look like an accident, or worse, a disappearance with no clues. Their families, their fans, their country would have no idea what really happened. Hours later, as the convoy moved deeper into unknown territory, the outside world began to unravel. News stations flashed breaking headlines. National football team bus missing. No contact. Coast Guard searching for debris after reported crash. Nation in shock as players vanish without a trace. Search parties mobilized. Helicopters scanned coastlines. Volunteers combed through forests. The country mourned in confusion, fear, and disbelief. A nation that once celebrated victory now prayed for miracles. Back inside the truck, the players huddled together in hopeless darkness, their wrists burning from restraints, their breaths shaky. Adrian quietly whispered to the teammate closest to him, "Stay strong. Whatever happens, stay strong." But even he couldn't ignore the weight of the soldier's words replaying in his mind. Your coach signed your fate. Somewhere in a private hospital bed, Coach Victor Henshaw wasn't sick. He was waiting. And the betrayal he had committed was bigger than any of the players could yet imagine. They were gone from the world, and nobody knew where they were being taken, or why. When the players finally regained consciousness, it felt as though they had awakened inside the stomach of the earth itself. The air was damp, thick, and cold enough to sting their throats. Cement walls rose on all sides, rough, unpainted, sweating moisture, while a single dim bulb buzzed overhead like an exhausted firefly. No windows. No sunlight. No clocks. Time itself seemed to have been buried alive with them. One by one, the players realized where they were, or rather, where they weren't. No stadium chants. No freedom. No sky. Just the hollow echo of distant footsteps and the metallic slam of gates somewhere up the corridor. Their beds were nothing but thin mats spread across the freezing floor. The youngest players trembled, still in the torn remnants of their travel jerseys. Others pressed their hands against their necks, remembering the rough cloth blindfolds that had been yanked off moments before everything went black. Morning, if it even was morning, announced itself with the groan of a sliding steel door. A guard entered, wearing a mask and holding a metal bucket. Inside it was their daily meal, a grayish, watery porridge that barely qualified as food. He scraped it into a row of cracked bowls and left without saying a word. It tasted like wet sand and despair. But hunger left them no choice. Then came the interrogations. Every few hours, boots thundered down the corridor. A guard would shout a name, drag the chosen player out, and disappear into the concrete labyrinth. Screams sometimes followed. Other times, nothing. Just an eerie silence that felt even worse. When the players returned, their faces were pale, their eyes sunken, their bodies trembling. They were being punished for a crime they never committed. Days blended into each other. Sleep came in shallow seconds. Darkness clung to their skin like a second layer of clothing. Some players stopped talking entirely, staring at the floor as though the last pieces of their identity were slipping through the cracks. Then the sickness started. First, it was a fever. Unexplained, sudden, brutal. The underground air was stagnant, never changing, filled with the breath of dozens of frightened men. With no medicine and no clean water, bodies weakened fast. One of the midfielders collapsed during roll call, his pulse faint, his skin burning. Another coughed until his ribs ached, blood staining his lips. Fear spread faster than the illness. And through it all stood the captain. He refused to break. No matter how hollow his own stomach felt, no matter how raw his throat became from dehydration, he walked from player to player, checking on them, reassuring them, sharing what little strength he had left. "When we get out," he told them. "Not if when we get out the world will know the truth. What they buried will not stay buried forever." His voice, steady even in the darkness, became their anchor. The guards tried to isolate him, interrogate him longer, starve him more harshly, but something inside him refused to bend. He kept hope alive when the facility itself seemed engineered to crush it. In that underground prison, the captain became more than the leader of a team. He became the last light left in a world designed to extinguish every spark. Little did he know, the real nightmare hadn't even begun. Meanwhile, the coach, after the team vanished, his life changed tremendously. His bank account swelled with wealth he had never earned. His political friends ensured the investigation pointed nowhere. He bought houses, properties, cars. He traveled abroad under the guise of medical rehabilitation. And years later, long after the nation had moved on, he quietly retired. No fanfare, no scrutiny, no justice. He lived in comfort while mothers mourned sons they would never bury. Time inside the underground prison did not move. It rotted. Days blended into nights, nights into nightmares. The players, once strong enough to sprint across a full pitch without losing breath, were reduced to shadows who struggled just to stand. Malnutrition tightened its cold fingers around them. The watery porridge they received each morning barely kept their hearts beating. Their ribs pressed against their skin. Their lips cracked. Their eyes sank deeper into their skulls. The first player to fall was Bako, the team's goalkeeper. He had always been loud, joking even in the tensest matches, the kind of man who could make a whole locker room laugh with a single comment. But now, in that concrete hell, his voice faded into whispers, then into silence. One morning, he simply did not wake up. The captain knelt beside him for a long time, shaking his shoulder gently, refusing to accept the truth. "Bako, get up," he whispered. But Bako was gone. Another player, Charles, followed a few days later. Then Jones. Then Luis. Their bodies failed one at a time, like lights switching off in a hallway that had once been bright. Each death tore through the group with a pain more suffocating than hunger. There were no funerals, no prayers, no family members to lean on. The guard dogs dragged the bodies out without ceremony, leaving the survivors trapped with the choking scent of grief. The captain became the one constant, the steady hand in the darkness. He held the dying players' hands, wiping sweat from their foreheads with trembling fingers, whispering the same words again and again. "You're not alone. I'm here." He stayed with each one until the very last breath, even when the guards yelled at him to step back. Nothing could separate him from his brothers. At night, when sleep refused to come, he replayed their memories in his mind, moments that felt like they belonged to another life. The bus rides filled with music, the locker room laughter, the adrenaline rush of walking into a stadium with thousands cheering. Their victories, their arguments, their hopes, their youth, all of it now lived only inside him, flickering like a broken reel of film. Sometimes he imagined the fans still chanting their names outside the prison walls, as if the world had not forgotten them. Sometimes he imagined his mother's face, or the warm sunlight of home. But the visions only deepened the ache, because every memory reminded him of everything they had lost. One night, after burying yet another teammate in the cold darkness of the underground corridor, The captain felt something inside him crack. He sank against a wall, his breath shaking, his hands trembling uncontrollably. "Why am I still here?" he whispered to no one. He wanted to give up, to stop fighting, to stop surviving in a world where his brothers' lives had been treated like disposable secrets. His vision blurred. His thoughts drifted to darker places. But then he heard a faint voice, Samson, the youngest player still alive, calling him from the other side of the cell. "Captain, don't leave us. Please." It wasn't a command. It was a plea from a boy who still believed the captain could hold their world together. The captain forced himself to breathe, forced himself to sit upright, forced himself to stay alive. Because even in the depths of despair, even when hope was a thread thinner than hair, someone still needed him. Someone still believed in him. And that belief, fragile as it was, kept him from falling into the abyss. The deaths continued. The suffering deepened. But the captain refused to collapse completely. He carried the memories of every fallen teammate like invisible weights strapped to his back. He carried their dreams, their voices, their final breaths. And he vowed, silently but fiercely, that if he ever left that prison alive, the world would know what happened to them. Their story would not die underground. Time had crushed the captain into a weaker mid-aged man. His hair had thinned, his strength had faded, and the prison walls seemed to squeeze closer with every passing year. Most of the teammates he once vowed to protect were long gone. Only a few fragile survivors remained, each of them barely holding on. The underground facility had become less of a prison and more of a tomb waiting to be sealed. Then one night, when the corridor was drenched in silence and the only sounds were the echoes of distant dripping water, a guard approached the captain's cell. This guard wasn't like the others. His eyes didn't carry the familiar cruelty. Instead, they held something the captain hadn't seen in decades: remorse. He whispered urgently, voice trembling as though the walls themselves might betray him. "Listen to me," he said. "You don't have much time. None of you do." The captain looked up from where he sat leaning against the cold wall, too tired to stand. The guard's hands shook as he gripped the bars. "This ends soon," the guard continued. "Orders came from above. They plan to kill everyone left. They want no survivors, no evidence." For a moment, the captain felt nothing. No panic, no shock, just a deep, numb acceptance, because this place had stolen every surprise life could offer. But the guard leaned closer, voice breaking with urgency. "You must leave. Now, while I can still help you." The guard unlocked the cell door with trembling hands. Instead of leading the captain toward the usual exit, he guided him to a small panel behind a stack of rusted crates. He pushed it aside to reveal a narrow, dirt-filled opening. "A service tunnel," he whispered. "It's not mapped. They forgot it exists. Crawl straight for as long as your body can handle, then keep crawling. You'll surface far from here, miles away." "I can't go with you." The captain stared at him. For decades he had only known cruelty from men in uniform. Yet here was a stranger risking everything, his job, his safety, his life, out of nothing but human mercy. There were no notes, no coded messages, no promises of reward. Just one man's conscience pushing back against a monstrous system. The captain placed a frail hand on the guard's wrist and whispered, "Thank you." It was all he had strength to offer. The guard swallowed hard and stepped back. "Run," he said. "Now." With the last scraps of strength in his withered body, the captain lowered himself into the tunnel. The air was thick with dust, choking, suffocating. The path was so tight he had to drag himself with his elbows, inch by painful inch. Every movement felt like knives digging into his bones. His knees scraped against stones. His breath grew shallow. Darkness pressed on him from every side. But for the first time in decades, the darkness wasn't a prison. It was a passage to freedom. Hours passed. maybe more. Time was meaningless in that suffocating crawlspace. His body trembled. His vision blurred. But he forced himself forward, fueled by memories of the teammates who never made it. Each pull of his arms was a tribute to someone he had lost. Finally, a distant glimmer of light appeared ahead. Not sunlight, just a faint gray glow, but enough to ignite hope. He crawled faster, ignoring the pain clamping through his joints, until at last he clawed his way out of the tunnel and collapsed onto soft earth. Above him stretched a clouded sky he hadn't seen in years. The air felt cold and fresh against his cracked lips. His chest shook as he breathed real air, free air, for the first time in so long. He staggered to his feet, leaning on a broken tree branch for support. Miles of empty land stretched around him. He walked, limping, stumbling, toward the faint outline of a distant village. By the time he reached its outskirts, his strength was completely gone. Villagers rushed toward him as he fell to his knees. The last thing he saw before everything faded to black was the outline of kind faces hovering above him. He had escaped. He had survived. But he was no longer the strong captain the world remembered. He was a weary, broken man carrying the ghosts of an entire team. When the captain opened his eyes again, he found himself lying on a bamboo mat in a dim hut. The scent of herbs filled the air, drifting from clay pots placed near his bed. A group of villagers stood around him, faces filled with concern, curiosity, and a hint of awe. They had found him collapsed at the edge of their community, frail as a scarecrow, barely breathing, and coated in years of dust and despair. A woman with kind eyes spooned warm broth to his lips. A man washed his wounds and wrapped his scraped arms. Children peeked in through the doorway, whispering, "Who is he?" The captain tried to speak, but his throat was too dry. His lips trembled, and only a raspy whisper escaped. The villagers exchanged glances, unsure of who this stranger was, but certain he had endured something unspeakable. 4 days, they nursed him. They fed him soft foods. They helped him sit, then stand, then walk. During the early nights, he woke screaming, visions of narrow tunnels, dying teammates, and echoing footsteps of guards flooding his mind. But the villagers would rush in, placing gentle hands on his shoulders, grounding him back to safety. Slowly, painfully slowly, his memories began to align again. He remembered sunlight, crowds, stadium cheers, the green field, the anthem sung before matches. He remembered laughter in the locker room, the playful shoves, the dreams they all shared. And then he remembered the night everything was stolen. He whispered one name over and over, the name of his team. The villagers didn't understand at first, but word spread. A stranger claiming to have been part of a famous national team from decades ago? It sounded impossible, until a traveling trader heard the story and recognized the name immediately. That team vanished 27 years ago, the trader said, eyes wide. It was national news. The country mourned them. The trader reported the discovery to local authorities. Within days, police arrived at the village with photographs, old newspapers, and questions. When the captain saw his own photograph, taken when he was young, strong, proud, his breath caught in his throat. The face in the picture seemed like someone else entirely, a ghost of a man he used to be. He touched the old photo with trembling fingers, tears streaking down his hardened cheeks. The authorities confirmed his identity within hours. News broke everywhere. Captain of 1980 national team found alive after 27 years. The world was stunned, overwhelmed with disbelief, sorrow, and anger. They transported him to the city, placing him in a secure medical facility. Reporters filled the entrance, flashing cameras and shouting questions, but the captain was shielded from the chaos. For the first time in decades, he saw skyscrapers, streetlights, televisions, ordinary things that now felt alien. After a thorough medical check, the authorities arranged a private interview. They seated him in a quiet room with soft lighting to avoid overwhelming him. 3 investigators entered, 2 men and 1 woman, each wearing solemn expressions. They sat across from him, not as interrogators but as people finally meeting a legend they once thought lost forever. The lead investigator leaned forward gently. "We're deeply sorry for everything you endured," he began. "But the world needs answers. What happened to your team?" The captain swallowed hard. His voice was rough from years of silence, but steady enough. He spoke of the underground prison, the interrogations, the sickness, the deaths. His voice cracked when he spoke of teammates who died with his hand in theirs. The investigators listened, horrified and silent. After he finished recounting his ordeal, the room fell quiet. The captain could hear his heartbeat pounding in his ears. He expected more questions, accusations, disbelief, but instead, the woman investigator asked the question they feared. A question that could change everything. "Captain, can you lead us back to where you were held?" The captain closed his eyes, letting the weight of the question settle. The memories were a maze of damp tunnels, dim lights, and endless corridors, but he had survived them once. He opened his eyes slowly. "I don't know if I can," he whispered, "but I will try." And just like that, the mission to uncover the truth behind one of the greatest disappearances in the nation's history began. The journey began before dawn. A convoy of police trucks, forensic vans, and armed response units rolled out of the city and into the wilderness, following a man who had not walked free land in nearly 3 decades. The captain rode in the lead vehicle, flanked by officers who watched him with a mixture of respect and concern. He looked older than his years, weakened but determined, as though the forest itself had been waiting for him to return. The roads grew narrower the deeper they went. Civilization vanished behind them, replaced by thick vegetation and towering trees that swallowed the sunlight. The captain stared out the window, each turn sparking fragments of memory. Snapshots of blindfolded marches, distant gunshots, the echo of cruel laughter. "Are you sure this is the right path?" an officer asked quietly. The captain nodded slowly. "I remember. The smell of pine, the slope in the land, and the sound of water. We're close." With every mile, the wilderness seemed to grow heavier, as though the forest knew terrible secrets and was reluctant to reveal them. Finally, the convoy could go no further. The vehicle stopped at an overgrown dirt trail swallowed by vines. The captain stepped out first, leaning on a walking stick provided earlier. A forensic officer helped him down, but he gently waved the hand away. "I can walk," he murmured. "I must walk." They pushed into the forest on foot, 20 officers, a forensic team, and one survivor guiding them through nature's silent graveyard. Birds fell quiet as they approached. Even the wind seemed to hesitate. The captain paused beside a rusted metal sign half buried under moss. "This used to be a checkpoint," he whispered. The officers brushed away the moss. Beneath the rusted stains, faded letters spelled out a code the authorities recognized immediately. This was a restricted military zone," an officer muttered. They continued deeper, hacking through thorny branches, stepping over collapsed wooden beams, ducking under fallen trees. Every step felt like walking into the mouth of a forgotten beast. Then the captain stopped. His breathing hitched, shallow, trembling, not from exhaustion but recognition. "Here," he whispered. "This is where they brought us blindfolded." Everyone looked around. At first, they saw only trees and shadows. Then, slowly, a shape materialized behind a curtain of vines, a massive concrete wall partially swallowed by the forest. Embedded in the wall were 2 steel doors, large enough to fit vehicles, now covered in rust and dirt. Except the doors were wide open. A chill ran through the group. Forensic officers exchanged uneasy glances. Police raised their weapons. "Stay behind us," the lead officer warned. The captain shook his head. "No. This is my past. I know what awaits inside." They approached the entrance cautiously. The air grew humid, thick with an acrid scent that stung their nostrils. The closer they came, the more recognizable it became. "Gunpowder," a forensic specialist whispered. "Fresh." A heavy silence followed. Unnatural, suffocating. Even the insects seemed to avoid the place. The lead officers stepped inside first, flashlights slicing through the darkness. The concrete walls were cracked, the floor littered with debris. It was unmistakably an underground bunker. Long, narrow corridors stretching into darkness. Then came the first shout. "Bodies!" For a moment, no one breathed. The captain stepped forward, despite the officers trying to hold him back. He needed to see. He needed to know. They entered the main chamber of the bunker. There, scattered across the floor like discarded puppets, lay several bodies dressed in militia clothing. Burnt patches on the walls suggested an intense firefight. The bodies bore gunshot wounds, some fresh, some already stiffened. The captain's face tightened, not in fear but in recognition. "These men," he whispered. "They were guards. The ones who used to beat us." One officer knelt and examined a fallen rifle. They weren't expecting an attack. Whoever did this took them by surprise. Forensic technicians swept through the room. "Multiple bullet calibers," one said. "This wasn't a single shooter." As they moved deeper into the bunker, the unsettling truth became clearer. Someone had already been here. Someone who knew the layout. Someone who wanted to erase all evidence of the prison. The captain's voice trembled as he stared at the carnage. "They're cleaning up loose ends." A dreadful realization spread through the team. If the guards had been executed, then the people behind the 27-year conspiracy weren't just covering tracks. They were preparing for the final part of a long-buried operation. And they knew the captain was alive. The captain stepped deeper into the bunker, his boots echoing hollowly against the concrete floor. Flashlights cut through the darkness, illuminating walls streaked with grime and the lingering scent of gunpowder. Each step was heavier than the last. He could feel it before he saw it, a silence so absolute, so suffocating, that it pressed down on his chest like a physical weight. And then he saw them. The remaining captives. His teammates. The ones he had imagined holding onto for years, the ones he had survived for, the ones he had dreamed of rescuing. They were gone. Not asleep. Not alive. Not even faintly moving. They had been executed. Their bodies lay lifeless on the floor, arranged in a cruel, orderly chaos. A thin layer of dust coated some of the faces, a grim reminder that the executioners had left them long enough for time to settle, yet recent enough that the air still carried the coppery tang of blood. The captain's knees buckled. His hands clutched at the air, shaking violently. "No! No! No!" His voice cracked and rose into a scream that reverberated off the concrete walls. "No! No! No! You can't!" He fell to his knees among the corpses, touching their faces, shaking their shoulders, as if sheer will could bring them back. Tears poured freely, unrestrained, carving tracks down the dirt on his face. For decades, he had carried the weight of survival. For decades, he had imagined this reunion. And now, the reunion was nothing but horror. Investigators circled silently, their own faces pale with shock and sorrow. The lead officer placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "Captain, we need to know what happened here." The captain shook him off, his chest heaving. They were my team, all of them, gone." A forensic officer moved carefully across the floor, examining the scene. "It's as if the entire bunker was evacuated just hours ago. There are no guards left." The weight of realization hit the captain like a hammer. They knew I would lead them here," he whispered. "They expected me. They silenced the last witnesses." Every detail from decades ago suddenly clicked together in a torrent of grief and anger. The months of planning, the careful hiding of evidence, the murder of anyone who might reveal the truth. It had all been orchestrated to stop him, to erase the story, to bury the past forever. The captain's hands trembled on the cold floor as he stared at the empty corridors. He felt the ghosts of his team everywhere, their laughter, their dreams, their pain, but no one remained to witness it. Then a forensic officer spoke from the corner of the bunker, crouched beside a filing cabinet caked in dust. "Captain, you need to see this." The officer held up a small notebook, bound in worn leather. Inside were meticulously recorded entries: dates, times, prisoner counts, guard rotations. It was the bunker's operational log. Flipping carefully through the pages, he paused at the last entry. His finger traced the ink as he read aloud. "Operation complete. All captives removed. Prepare final silencing. Witness protection unnecessary. Name of key survivor, Adrian." The words struck the captain like a thunderclap. His own name, written in cold, impersonal handwriting, as though his life had been logged as a variable in someone else's experiment. He staggered backward, nearly collapsing against the wall. Rage and grief mingled, hotter and sharper than any pain he had known in the prison. Every injustice, every death, every betrayal, coaches, politicians, paramilitary units, culminated here, in the barren silence of the bunker, in the brutal reality that his friends were gone, and yet he had been singled out, preserved, observed, catalogued like a specimen. The captain sank to the floor, head in his hands, screaming again, not just for his team, but for the world that had allowed this atrocity to unfold. He realized the fight wasn't over. The bunker was empty, but the evidence, the logs, the meticulous planning, it was all proof. Whoever orchestrated this wanted to hide the truth, but now the truth had been found. Somewhere in the shadows of the forest, the name of the mastermind remained unspoken. But for the first time in decades, the captain knew where to look. And the hunt, for justice, for closure, for vengeance, was about to begin. Even after decades of relentless pursuit, Adrian never expected the final pieces of the puzzle to fall into place so suddenly. The forensic officer who had catalogued the bunker's logs approached him quietly in the city archives, eyes shadowed with the weight of what he was about to reveal. "Captain," he said, holding a folder of old documents, "the name in the logs, it ties everything together. The entire scheme, the disappearances, the cover-up." He paused, letting the words hang. "It points to one person." Adrian felt the weight of history pressing down on him, the air thick as if the ghosts of his teammates were holding their breath. "Who?" he asked, as if he doesn't know, voice low but steady. "The coach," the officer replied. "Your coach. The man you trusted, the one who was supposed to guide you, protect you. He orchestrated the entire operation. But he died 2 years ago. Natural causes. Ironically, while living a life of comfort after betraying you all." A cold silence settled over Adrian. He thought of the team, his friends, his brothers, erased for decades, and how justice had finally come, even if the mastermind himself had escaped the law by dying quietly in his sleep. The sting of justice delayed was bitter, but it was also a relief. The truth was no longer buried. Word spread across the nation like wildfire. The people, long haunted by the disappearance of their beloved national team, now understood the grim reality. The team had not abandoned them, nor had they simply vanished into thin air. They had been victims of a calculated, sinister plot, a political and criminal machine fueled by greed and betrayal. Public outrage mixed with mourning. Citizens demanded accountability for those who had enabled the coach, those who had turned blind eyes, and those who had silenced witnesses. The nation finally confronted its painful past, grappling with both sorrow and vindication. Streets that once mourned in confusion now carried memorials, tributes, and stories recounting the courage, unity, and brilliance of the vanished team. For Adrian, the journey was far from over. The team's memories were his compass, and closure meant honoring them. On a crisp morning, he arrived at a recently constructed memorial on the outskirts of the city. The monument was simple yet solemn, a black stone engraved with the names of each player, a plaque telling the story that had remained hidden for 27 years. Adrian knelt before the memorial, running his hands over the etched names, tracing familiar letters as if he could feel the presence of his fallen brothers. He reached into his bag and pulled out his old captain armband, faded from years of use but still heavy with meaning. Holding it gently, he placed it on the stone, letting it rest over the name that had once led the team onto countless victorious pitches. He whispered, voice choked with emotion but clear, strong enough for the wind to carry it. "You didn't die in vain. The world finally knows."